your Monday night with us. So we're obviously going to talk about how to pass the NAPLEX. And before we get into that, though, we just had a couple of things to go through to really kick off this evening. So just a disclaimer before we jump into everything, the views expressed are our own and do not represent any entities we may be affiliated with. And I'll kick it over to George.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. For those who don't know, my name is George Opperman, and I'm one of the founders of Pharmacist Initiative Leaders. So excited to be doing this collaboration with Learn with Libby. With that, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about pills. We were established in 2016 to pioneer pipelines, platforms, and pathways for historically overlooked pharmacists into positions of influence and innovation. And so we do have a big, audacious vision to, by 2045, help to redefine the value of pharmacists across health and wealth ecosystems. And so we feel like we'll be doing that across closing the gaps between access and advancement at every stage. And so as we go to the next slide, our biggest pipeline is our Pills Protege program. It will be starting this Wednesday. And so if you haven't heard or if you're not a part of that, feel free to connect with us offline. You'll also see on the next slide a way to directly find that out. But the Pills Protege program over the last 9 years has helped to pipeline over 200 pharmacists into their first choice residency or fellowship. And you're seeing some of the fruit of that on our discussion today. So if we go to our next slide, our platform is new as of this year, our first ever private membership platform. And so we're using the Mighty platform, which some of you got the invitation today. If you look at that QR code on your computer screen, if you're not a part of the membership, feel free to scan that QR code and it'll take you directly to this page. And so we're looking to redefine the value of pharmacists to be professionals in charge. And we're providing access to a network, resources that are going to help you better your chances of not just a fellowship or residency, but your leadership profile at every stage, and then connections across the healthcare ecosystem. So as we think of our pathways, they're led by 3 leaders. Myself, I'm the corporate pathway leader. We have Dr. Josh Blackwell on the call, and he's going to be our clinical pathway leader. And then we have my beautiful wife, Dr. Portia Jordan, who did not get a fellowship, but is also a fellowship director. I'm a leader for Organon, and she'll be our direct entry and medical affairs expert. And so with that, we hope to pipeline and redefine the world of pharmacy with you.
Thank you for the overview. So on the call today, I'm joined by our lovely panelists. And before we get started, I'm going to get my slides up so we can see their beautiful pictures. So for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting just yet, I'm Libby Shelton. I'm a PharmD. I graduated from Purdue University and then completed my fellowship about a month ago with Rutgers University in Daiichi Sankyo. So there, I'm an oncology training manager, but outside of my 9 to 5 with Daiichi, I am the CEO and founder of Learn with Libby. I'll hand it off to Carsyn.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Carsyn. As mentioned, I am currently here in Madison, Wisconsin, where I am a second year, or as we call ourselves, senior administrative resident, and I'm at UW Health. I previously was down in Nashville, Tennessee, where I completed my PharmD and my MBA simultaneously, and I am a hashtag Blackwell protege. I'll pass it off to Josiah.
Appreciate that, Carsyn. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Josiah Moore. I'm a field medical accounts fellow at GlaxoSmithKline. Had the pleasure of going through the Pills program last year and just glad to be here and share some words of wisdom.
Thank you. So before we get into it, I have to know, how do you pronounce the exam that we came here to discuss this evening? And I'll start with Carsyn.
The correct way, which is NAPLEX.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm from Mississippi, though, but I always say NAPLEX. So I'll preface it that way.
Okay. I will throw it to our audience now to see how y'all pronounce the exam. I'm going to give y'all a little hint. So if you scan the QR code, it'll allow you to vote on this poll that we have. Okay. And then I put the link in the chat as well. I don't know why it's not like that, but all right. So far, NAPLEX is winning. I don't know if anyone else. Any other votes? Anyone wants to cast a vote? Okay. Okay, so we don't have too many that say NAPLEX. Oh, there we go. Had to switch it up on me. All right. Thank you for participating in the little poll we had. So now let's get into what we came here for. So one of the questions I get asked a lot is, when should I start studying for the NAPLEX? I always say that rotations count as studying, but you'll need to do more than just show up to your rotations in order to pass. So Josiah, I'd love to hear, did you study while you were on rotations, and what did that really look like?
No, that's a great question, Libby. Absolutely. I study while on rotations. Of course, like you stated, the rotation itself is studying, but I attended Mercer University College of Pharmacy, and they required us to do UWorld every other weekend. We had to do like quizzes and things of that nature. Those were graded. So you're still in a formal course in addition to your rotations. So those were graded quizzes we would do every other weekend. And at the end of every rotation, we would have to take an exam. So we started with law, and then we transitioned to like therapeutic areas, other disease states and things of that nature. And we did that over the course of the year. That was more so soft studying, but it started on rotation. Yes.
All right, Carsyn, what did you do?
I did not formally study well on rotations. I would say it was more of a passive studying. I put my all into rotation projects, rotation topic discussions, and really just wanted to soak in my fourth year. I started to study a little bit more once I hit the spring semester of rotations, I would say. So that back end of the rotations, but more so once I graduated, that's when I hit the ground running.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I'm a little jealous of you, Josiah. You had that nice course that kept you on track. My experience, I did not have that opportunity, but I think that's also a great way to, one, stay on track, but don't be worried if you don't have that option within your program, and you can also hit the ground running once you graduate as well or finish rotations. All right. So graduation is a really exciting milestone, but it's not the only milestone happening at that point in time. So, once the celebrations end and you realize that you got to lock in for this exam, there can be a lot of emotions that come up throughout this process. So, Carsyn, we'll start with you. How did you feel after graduating and realizing that the NAPLEX was next?
Sure. Thank you. I felt a mix of emotions. One day I was really excited and happy to be done with school. And on the next day, or even a couple of hours after, my mood would switch because I was terrified of the NAPLEX. It was a daunting task that I knew I was prepared for, but I'll have to admit that I was a roller coaster of emotions. Thankfully, I had a really great support system that kept me level headed during those times of, I would call chaos, but definitely a mix of emotions is how I would say I felt.
Pretty accurate. All right, Josiah, how'd you feel?
Libby, I'll summarize how I feel in one word. And I think you used this word last year when we hosted something similar. And the word was terrifying. I I was terrified because, particularly because I knew people who had taken the NAPLEX and weren't successful. And I was worried that I'm going to put my all into this exam. I'm going to spend my hard earned money on this exam. I've been studying for 4 years for this exam, and I'm still not going to pass. And so, like what Carsyn said, a roller coaster of emotions. I felt like I had accomplished something, but not a lot because I wasn't officially a licensed pharmacist. If that makes sense. So you'll definitely feel that way after graduating. Just put the work in, lock in, definitely like how Libby said, and you'll come out on top for sure.
Absolutely. Be- Being that I went the industry route myself, and many industry fellowships and roles don't really require licensure. So I know a lot of fellows who chose not to get licensed based on that. So, Josiah, what made you decide to take the NAPLEX, and how has it helped you in your fellowship role or even outside of that?
Oh, that's a great question. What made me decide to take the Netflix? That's a multifaceted question. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of things were at play for me, right? I had family pressure saying, you went to pharmacy school. What do you mean you're not going to take this exam? You got a job in industry. What does that mean? They barely know what that is, right? And so definitely had some family pressure in the mix. Outside of that, another thing that made me take the NAPLEX was Howard University Fellowship Program paid for my NAPLEX. So I was incentivized, shameless plug, but I was definitely incentivized to take it. And so I'm like, they're paying for it. Why not take advantage of it? And that's ultimately what pushed me to go ahead and take it. Now, how has that helped me in my fellowship work? Being particularly in medical affairs, it's a very complex role because it's across the therapeutic area. It's a cross portfolio, right? My role is a cross portfolio to where I'm touching a lot of different therapeutic areas. And so you don't control necessarily what asset the company acquires, or you don't control what disease states you prefer over the other. All you know is, look, this is an asset. It's an oncology asset in myelofibrosis. You need to do a practice and apply session on it, and you need to present on it. And so being able to digest complex information is something that's beneficial and something that we do as pharmacists. And beyond that, I will say we live in or where we work in an environment where it ebbs and flows, right? I can't tell you the amount of people that have gotten laid off in the industry. They're looking for their next role in the industry. And so I always looked at it as almost an insurance policy or a security blanket. Like I can always go practice and be a pharmacist in the meantime, versus I had some friends that didn't have that luxury. And so it was pretty much a lot of different factors that play. But we can talk more about it as we go through the presentation for sure.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I love the security piece that you brought up. A lot of my co-fellows, even once they got licensed, they were able to work on weekends and make some additional cash because fellowship doesn't always pay us that nice pharmacist salary right off the bat. So they were able to supplement their income in other ways because they got licensed. Just another option. All right, so this one is specifically for Carsyn. Residency programs often have strict timelines for licensure, and I've heard some residents trying to take the exam as early as possible in case they need another attempt, kind of how Josiah mentioned he was a little terrified thinking about other individuals he knows. So Carsyn, how did the timeline of your residency program influence when you scheduled your exam?
Yeah, there were, I would say, two deadlines that I was trying to meet. So my organization, we had a deadline, and then ASHP mandates a deadline of when you need to be fully licensed. So, of course, that deadline is pretty strict and it's already set in stone and it's non-negotiable. However, it was a really interesting conversation that I had with my residency program director early on, advocating for study time, advocating to have time off to get ready to and prepare for the exam. There was a conversation or a gentle nudge coming from his direction to get me to take the exam earlier because, to your point, some individuals are not successful in their first go around. And so, in order to allow for potential second tries, he wanted me to take the exam early as possible, or he recommended that. However, I knew that I wanted to be one and done. I wanted to give it my all, give it my best effort. And so I was actually put in the driver's seat to advocate for myself. And I would encourage everyone on the call who's preparing for this journey of licensure to advocate for yourself. There are some hard deadlines. Again, ASHP and my organization had hard deadlines, but I was pretty adamant and pretty persistent with my RPD and pretty transparent in the time that I needed to study for the exam to feel prepared, and was willing to negotiate and give a little so that I could have that time off. And so it did influence my timeline, I would say, just because there was that hard and fast deadline, but I still was able to advocate for myself and take it when I was ready. And I didn't test until late July, actually. And I was one of the last individuals who just took the exam. We have a cohort of 29 residents. I was one of the last ones, and it didn't phase me because I knew I was ready and I knew I was going to be prepared, and I knocked it out of the park on the first try. So it's just personal preference, I'd say.
Yeah, basically what I'm hearing is do what's best for you within the provided guidelines that you have. So before we move on to discussing NAPLEX study strategies, I just want to remind you all to put any questions you have in the Slido, and that link is in the chat. Or you can scan the QR code if you would like. All right. So between the graduation celebrations, moving across the country, starting work, and just overall adulting, and maybe even the identity crisis that comes with no longer being a student, how did you all balance studying on top of everything else that was happening during this transition period? And what did your study routines look like during the week versus on the weekend? Josiah, do you want to start?
Always, for sure, I'll hop right in. Y'all, I'm gonna be very transparent. Post grad life is difficult, right? You're not a student anymore. No one's giving you a set schedule. Nobody's holding your hand. And you really have to buckle down, lock in, and study and get it done. Full transparency, I moved after graduation. So I didn't start studying until I actually landed where I moved to. So I moved in like June, started my role in July, didn't really start studying until I want to say like July, sometime in July. And so that's what I had to do and what worked best for me. Being a fellow, I had a little bit more time to play with. But most companies give you like a month and a half of onboarding, things of that nature. So if you lock in early and handle your business, you won't be scrambling when your fellowship really picks up. So that's my advice. But what did your weekends versus weekday versus weekend schedule look like? So I did an 8-week schedule. And so I gave myself 8 weeks because I knew I wasn't going to want to do it in a month. That was just not enough time. But I had one rest day. That was my Sunday. I didn't do absolutely no studying on Sunday. And then I also penciled in time for catch up days because if I fall behind, I can always catch back up. We set out with this schedule. We think everything's going to go as planned, but little do you know, things happen, right? You might not have as much time as you thought you would have this day or that day, but you pencil in that time for those setbacks in scheduling, you'll remain on track. And so that's ultimately what I did to kind of balance my routine. I'll pass it over to Carsyn.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned scheduling time, scheduling catch up time. Definitely, that was very similar in my schedule. I too did move from Nashville up to Wisconsin right after graduation. I think maybe a couple weeks after, I will say. And for me, it took me a couple of days to get the ball rolling on my study schedule. I did celebrate with family and friends. It's a big accomplishment to graduate with a pharmacy degree. So I did want to enjoy just a little bit, but I was also keeping my eye on the prize, which was passing that exam. So after the celebrations and the family time and such with those who have supported me through pharmacy school, the first day that I went to sit down to study, I actually ended up having conversations with friends and family who were calling my phone. I have to lock in. I have to still pass this exam. It's very different that we don't get to practice until we pass our exams. That's foreign for some people who are not in pharmacy. And so explaining that to your family and friends is going to be a huge piece of advice that really helped me because that was the only way that I could balance studying was being very transparent with my family and friends. Hey, I'm going to study from this time to this time and I can hang out afterwards. I treated studying as a full-time job. So I would study from 8 o'clock to 5 p.m. And then I would go out with friends or get on the phone, etc., after that 5 o'clock hour. So that's what my weekday looked like. As far as the weekends, it fluctuated depending on how close I was getting to the exam. I was trying to pack and study and relax and still go to church and all the things. And so sometimes that's what my weekend just consists of, a hodgepodge. It really was not an organized 2 days, but I knew Monday through Friday, my job was to study. And I would go back up to my school. My student ID still worked. I still swiped in there, went in that library and sat down. I will say one thing remained consistent from Monday through Friday, whether that was I was studying a large topic or a smaller topic. I started my day with calculations and I ended my day with calculations. I use that as a way to wake my brain up and then also to cool my brain down. And I figured that if I could complete calculations when I'm halfway asleep, I would be in pretty good shape. So it was just more of also a confidence boost, I would say, and just really making sure I nailed down the calculations. Every morning I was doing calculations and every afternoon I was doing calculations.
I like that. Like Josiah said, you got to lock in. And so I did something similar. Even if I had to use a catch up day and things didn't go as planned, I would always do calculations every single day. So I stand by that. All right. So a lot of pharmacy schools provide access to RX Prep or UWorld. And I know some even do like Pass NAPLEX Now or other resources. But what things did you all use that you found that were efficient to help you study along the way? I'll start with Carsyn.
Definitely my NAPLEX book, the UWorld book, and the questions were my best friends. I carried that book around everywhere I went, and I utilized the the question bank that was tied to the UWorld series. I also had a notebook because I am a traditionalist and I have to write things down. I can't type things out and remember it the same way as if I were to write it down. So I also had a notebook, a composition book, the black and white ones that we all know about, and I would write down various things. It wasn't for me to go back and look, but just that muscle memory is what helped me. I didn't write down every single thing, but I definitely wrote down quite a bit. I would also say I did have flashcards for the top 200 drugs roughly, and that was just brand and generic, and I would just also carry those everywhere that I went just because that you can stick in your bag, you can stick in your car, whatever it may be. When you have some off time, you can just practice brand and generic. So I definitely would utilize flashcards and then the UWorld NAPLEX book itself, but the question bank tied to it were definitely key.
Yeah, a couple things Carson said that stuck out, not to duplicate efforts because I did a lot of the things that he said, but I know you all don't want to do it. I know it sounds boring, but read the whole book. Yeah, please. Read the whole book. I even had chapters that I went back and revisited that I knew were my weaker areas. So like oncology, I didn't get a lot of that when I was in school. ID, it wasn't my best topic when I was in school. So go back and revisit things that aren't your best topics, but definitely read the whole book. Outside of that, don't isolate yourself. Like, I don't know about y'all, but for my people doing fellowship, find you a residency friend. Cause your residency friend is gonna keep you on point. Like Carsyn residency. Listen, Ben had it done. I had another friend I will always go to and ask questions like, how did you approach this? Or did you do that? Or did you only go through the book and your questions? Is that sufficient? And you're like, I know, keep going, keep doing it, stay consistent. And then Joshua Blackwell, go to him, let him quiz you. You'll see. But no, stay legit and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. At some point, you get a little tired of doing the same thing over, and it's like delayed gratification. You're working so hard, but you haven't seen the results yet. But keep doing it, lock in with your friends, let them encourage you, let them tell you no, okay, here's maybe something you want to focus on. Look at those weak areas again. I love that. Right. So you put in the work, you studied for weeks. How did you know you were ready? Or did you ever feel like you were ready? And we'll kick it off with Josiah.
The answer is no. For me, you're never going to 100% feel ready. I don't care what you do. It even got to the point like towards the end of me studying, I would, on you where you can select every single question in the entire test bank and randomly do like 125 random questions. So you're flipping back and forth between like topics, going from calculations to this topic to that topic. I was even doing that towards the end. And you still don't feel 100% ready. You just trust yourself and know that you put the work in and you're going to reap the reward. So just keep going. But yeah, you never feel 100% like I have this exam in the bag because you don't know. You don't know what they're going to throw at you on test day. We could talk about what was heavy on my exam. I had heavy ID, heavy HIV. And I'm just like, these are not my best topics, but you got to continue to prepare. And even after the exam, you're going back, oh my God, I missed that question. Oh my God, I missed that question. But yeah, just put your best foot forward and don't delay it. Just take the exam after you've done the study.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm giggling over here, but only because it's so true. I don't think I ever felt ready to take the exam with a few caveats. I felt like I had the endurance to sit for a long exam. I knew I was a little bit more ready than I was prior to because you're on your fourth year rotations. You haven't taken an exam in how long? This is a very long and time intense exam to where you need to be focused for all 6 hours or whatever the time limit is. And so I realized when I could sit without needing to, I did have a couple of breaks and mimic the structure of the actual NAPLEX. When I could make it through that, I felt like I would be a little bit more prepared and I felt a little bit more confident. I will say when I started to look at the questions, not so much looking for what is the correct answer, but what is the question asking me? And also what are key things that I should be looking for? I felt more prepared. I felt more confident. I won't say ready, but I say confident. I feel as I was approaching the exam, doing more questions, I felt more comfortable in those. And I knew when I would get them wrong, I would know why I overlooked something and I could almost recognize the question structure a little bit more. So I was just feeling a little bit more confident, I would say, in that. And so it's more so just the logistics of the exam, the long exam. And you have to be locked in for the from start to finish. So once you can sit for that long, be engaged, be mentally engaged, pay attention to what you're doing, that's when I started to feel a little bit more confident. And then also as I started to get some of the questions correct more frequently, because it was really rough in the beginning, I started to feel more confident.
Yeah, I think you guys both made good points about be diligent, put in the work to get ready. And then as you build up your stamina for the test, you'll feel confident, more confident, maybe not ready, but you'll feel more confident in what's to come. All right. So I'm sure we've all crammed for an exam at some point in our pharmacy journey, whether or not we want to admit it. So I want to know how Josiah and Carsyn, how you spent your 24, 48 hours leading up to the exam. Were you cramming or were you resting and relaxing and just trying to keep the nerves down?
Yeah, I can go ahead and get us started. So, one thing that we are all probably very familiar with is how long it takes to get your ATT. Because it took a while for me to get that, I had to test in another state. So, I had to drive 24 hours prior to, I think actually I drove a little bit over the 24-hour mark. So, maybe 26 hours before my exam, I was driving to Illinois and I was going to stay in a hotel just because I wanted to be near the testing center the day of. I also love to stress snack. So when I'm stressed out, I like to eat. However, you can't bring snacks into the testing center. So I was carb loading before the exam. I was eating all of the carbs that I could possibly have an intake just because I wanted to make sure that my stomach was not going to be rumbling in there. But I did not cram. I actually spent time with my Bible, spent time talking to friends, getting my mind clear and confident to take the exam. I didn't want to start to psych myself out, but I wanted to have a clear mind. I wanted to go in motivated and encouraged. So that's how I spent my couple of hours or my 24 to 48 hours leading up to the exam. And I was in a hotel. So I actually did not get really good rest before the exam, which is frowned upon, highly frowned upon.
Similar to Carsyn, like on that note, I did not get good rest before this exam. Like I, I can just remember being a little restless, like a kid at Christmas almost, couldn't really get sleep. But y'all, this is not an exam you can cram for. It's not gonna work. It's just not. It's not going to work this time. The last 24 to 48 hours, maybe 48, I was still looking at a little material just here and there, maybe, but I know the last day, like I didn't look at anything. And so like you have to really set that schedule and stick to it. But like leading up to that exam, I was trying to be as light as possible. I can remember the day of the exam, I packed a few snacks. I think I packed 2 apples or something like that, and I just ate those on, like, my break. I didn't eat a heavy meal beforehand because I think better on an emptier stomach. So, wasn't eating a lot, the nerves were there, I think that's expected, but just know and believe you cannot cram for this long exam. You just can't. Definitely prepare, put the work in, and stay the course, and you'll reap the reward for sure.
Yeah, echo everything y'all said, down to the snacks and the driving to another state. Can relate. We'll skip that one for now, but did you take your breaks during the exam? Carson mentioned it's a 6-hour exam. During that time, you get 2 optional breaks. And so if you're taking that break, you gotta lock back in. So how are you staying focused and keeping your stamina up the whole time? So we'll start with Josiah.
Yes, I took both of my breaks because my brain needed a break. Because when I was locked in on those questions, I'm thinking of everything. Like I'm trying to hit the question from all different angles. I definitely took both of my breaks, and I didn't take any breaks outside of the 2 that were optional. Like I didn't take multiple breaks when my time was counting against me. How did I keep my stamina up? I took practice exams beforehand, and so those required a good bit of stamina. So you can test and see like how well you can do and how long you can go for prior to taking the actual exam. So I would say that helped a good bit as well. But other than that, like definitely take your breaks. Don't try to push this exam from start to finish because that's don't even try it. But definitely take your breaks and you'll be fine. Take a good practice exam. You'll be
Yeah, I will echo that. I took both of my breaks. There's no award for finishing the exam first. There's no award for finishing the exam quickly or using up all of your time. So I definitely took both of my breaks, took my time. I utilized the breaks even if I felt like I could power through the first, for example, when I got met with the first optional break. I took it, even though I felt like I could power through. And that was just to give my mind a mental reset. You don't have to take the entire time of the break. I forgot what you were allotted, but you don't have to use that whole time. So even if you just get up and go for a walk outside the testing center, or not the testing center, the testing room, like in the center, just to stretch your legs out, kind of shake out whatever questions you have just seen and just mentally check back in. So I would definitely recommend taking both of the optional breaks. I know individuals who also took additional breaks. However, I don't think your time stops at those breaks, or there's some kind of caveat to that. So just be aware of that. I think during the exam, while I was sitting, one thing that kept me focused was utilizing the pen or the whiteboard and paper that they provide to me and writing things down. Like I mentioned, I'm a traditionalist. My friends will tell you I'm really like 65 years old in real life. but I like to write things down. So I would write things down just to make sure my brain wasn't mindlessly reading the question and clicking. It was just a double check, and definitely can attest to taking practice exams. When you're studying, try to study for blocked in time and see how your body reacts to it. And don't start out taking 6 hour block, but work your way up to it, right? We don't just go out and run a marathon. Some do. I have to preface that, but you have to work up to it. So building up your endurance, it's like a mental game. It's a physical game because you're sitting for a long time, but they give you breaks for a reason. And again, there's no award at the end saying, oh, you finished and you still had an hour left. They don't care if you take the whole time or you finish in however long.
Moral of the story, take your breaks. All right. So something a little bit more fun. Once you finish the exam, how did you celebrate? And did you celebrate like after the exam or did you wait until you passed? So I'll start with Carsyn.
Yeah, so I was in another state, and so I was driving back. It's a short drive. I would say it's short. It's about an hour and a half drive. But once I got back, I made myself a pretty good meal. If you can't tell, I'm a foodie. So I made my favorite dish, and I had it already setting out, waiting on me. I love a good steak, so I had the steak defrosted and waiting for me. And I had a nice bottle of wine. So I had a nice steak and wine dinner. And it almost was just a mental relaxation night for me. I didn't do anything crazy or go out just because my program had us onboarding as well. So I really couldn't go on a vacation or party or anything like that.
For sure. And to that point, Carsyn, after I took my exam, what I did was I just kept replaying the questions that I thought I missed in my head. Like, I didn't really let up on myself. And that's something that I wish I would have done differently, in full transparency. I remember going out with my friends, like afterwards, and they would ask me, like, how did it go? And I'm just like, man, I don't know. Like, you just won't know until I'm that type of person. I don't know until I know. And even after I knew I passed, I told my parents and everybody, I told all my loved ones, all my friends, I passed. They were like, are you licensed? Is it done? Is it over? No, got to take the MPJE. So it was like back to square one again. Like, it's not over until it's over, or at least that's how my parents were. But no, definitely, that's something that I wish I would have done over again. Like, celebrate, definitely let loose a little bit if you can, unless you're in Carsyn situations where you can't, but just relax, do something relaxing, take that time to breathe a little bit, because that's a huge accomplishment for sure.
Yes, I will say when I found out I passed my exam, though, after calling everyone, I did celebrate. I went out with my friends and we had a good time because after I was fully licensed, so after I passed both exams, that's when I celebrated a little bit and had a little hoorah for myself.
I love that. I like to see the differences between the two of y'all. For me, I took mine in downtown New York City. So I had already mapped out where the closest Chick-fil-A was once my exam was over. So I went to Chick-fil-A, got myself a milkshake, and then went home and went to sleep for hours. So that was how I. All right. And then this is our last question before we get into Q&A. So I know this was open to students and recent grads. So putting yourself in their shoes, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? And then what advice do you have for the recent grads who are currently in the mix of studying or those who just want to set themselves up for the future? So I'll start with Josiah.
This is a great question. If I could do it all over again, what would I do differently? I would say I would probably, number one, believe in myself more, because I grinded all of pharmacy school and my grades were good grades. But again, like, this is the moment, like, I've been studying for all through pharmacy school. I would definitely believe in myself more. Would I change anything as far as my approach? Probably not, because ultimately it got me to where I needed to be, but leave it all out there on the field, right? Because it's a short sacrifice for a long-term gain. Like, You ain't never got to take the NAPLEX again. You ain't never got to take the MPJE again. Just keep your license up, get your CE. So lock in, do what you got to do. And yeah, you'll be fine. Don't overthink it and be confident. Be confident in who you are. Be confident that you studied and you got here not by chance, right? So y'all will be fine.
If I had to do it all over again, I think I would give myself more grace. I think I wouldn't be so strict to the schedules and the plan that I set out. I would often beat myself up if I didn't make it through all the chapters that were on my little calendar that I mapped out. But what I will tell you is I felt more confident with topics as I spent time with them, and I knew when I was ready. So it didn't matter if I made it through all of the topics that I set out for myself because again, as we mentioned, we had those catch-up days roped into our schedule already, so it's okay. But I was a little harsh on myself early on. No, I have to make it through the ID section. I have to. I have to stay on track. But give yourself grace because if you're not ready to move on, that's okay. You know who you are. You know what subjects you're more confident in, as opposed to those that you need to spend some more time on. And also, I think I would, to that same note, I wouldn't really bother asking people about how they felt on the exam immediately after or what was on their exam because I started to psych myself out. So my friends, again, I tested a little bit later and I was asking questions like, what was on your exam? Did you see HIV on your exam? Did you see infectious disease, cardiology? And it started to psych me out. And there's so many versions of the exam and so many algorithms of the questions that you might see that it doesn't matter. You need to just focus on yourself. I started to psych myself out. I would stay off of Reddit. Stay off of Reddit. That's the one piece of advice because anyone can upload on there and they can say whatever. You don't know if it's true or not. And very similar, we focus on what we think we got wrong. So as I was asking my friends, was HIV heavy? Was this heavy, etc.? That's what they're remembering. They probably really don't know. They can't remember every single question. And it started to get just putting me down this hole that I probably didn't need to be in and just stay to my pace, stay to what I need to focus on, make it through the whole book for sure. But definitely give yourself grace. I feel like I wish I would have done that and just be honest with yourself. If you need to spend a greater amount of time on something that you previously didn't anticipate, that's okay. You can be resilient, you can be flexible, shift things around, try different study patterns or whatnot, but you'll make it through because you have made it this far and you won't be failed at this point. So just trust yourself, give yourself grace, and stay off of Reddit.
Thank you both for the final-ish words of wisdom. We do have a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to populate them there or the chat, or feel free to come off mute and let us know.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, my name is Satchel Hunter. I'm a fourth year at the University of Florida College of Pharmacy. First, I want to thank you all for presenting today. I really enjoyed it. I did have a question. I was wondering, I guess it's not directly related to the NAPLEX, but they do coincide. For your MPJE, how far apart did you take it? And then are you guys familiar with the newer uniform MPJE that's launching for my year in 2026? If you aren't, that's okay. But the first question, how far apart would you say is the best to take the MPJE from the NAPLEX?
Carsyn, I don't know if you want to take that one first. I can share, but I was a fellow. I'm not sure if you're pursuing fellowship residency, and if you don't know yet, that's fine as well. But I took mine pretty far apart because I studied for 8 weeks for my NAPLEX, passed it in September, and then I took a little break. And then for the holidays, I've studied like my MPJE stuff and took it at the top of January. I just did what worked for me and my schedule the most. I don't think it matters that much, in my opinion, unless you need to be licensed by a certain date. But Carsyn, you can share your experience and speak more to that.
Yeah, I had that push to be licensed by a certain day. I took my exams. I was trying to think either 2 or 3 weeks apart. And I would say it depends on one, the study material that you have. So here in Wisconsin, there's a module course that we utilize. And so I knew that I would be prepared by the end of that module, and I hoped that I would be prepared by the end of that module, in addition to the training that I had down in Nashville. It varies when you look at what materials you need to review. I had to review a whole new state legislature, so I gave myself a couple more days than some of my co-residents did. But I would say I took it like 2 to 3 weeks apart. And really that was because I was going so hard studying for NAPLEX. I was already in the momentum, already in the groove, had the endurance, etc. So I didn't need that time to get myself rolling. I was already on the ball was already rolling in that aspect. And I am familiar with the universal MPJE. I'm looking at potentially being licensed in additional states as well. So I might be testing with you, but I don't know the logistics behind it just yet or which states are included. I know that there's information on the NABP website. And then there's been a few other organizations that have summarized it and put out some papers to it. I just haven't looked into it too much. And so that's about all I got. I know it exists. I don't know if it's a good thing or not just yet. I'm not too sure.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. Appreciate it.
I have a question. Hey guys, thank you for sharing. Really insightful so far. I know you took your NAPLEX a while ago, and of course you don't remember every question that was on there, and you said you were never felt fully prepared, but for the content that you reviewed and you did the practice questions, for those, did you feel like, okay, I know this, moving on, or was it still, okay, I still have to figure out what the best answer is? Did you feel like, okay, I studied this content, well, I feel confident in this material? Were you able to still answer it, or was it still like really difficult and like kind of crazy?
To me, it wasn't easy, if that's your question, because I remember questions from like oncology or questions from ID or HIV. And it's you study this material, but the way they word it might be differently, or it's not going to be like the same answer choices, if that makes sense. So it wasn't easy, but it was doable. I don't know. That's the best way I can explain it. Like, Carsyn, you can add to it,
Yeah.
but
I I knew what I didn't know. So I knew when I came to an oncology question that I needed to focus on the question a little bit more because I wasn't as confident as I was in the cardiology area. So it wasn't a fact of did I not know it at all. I just knew that this was a topic that let me lock in a little bit more on this question because this wasn't one that I can just identify the correct answer. My approach to studying the disease states was knowing like first line, second line, and then the special consideration. So I will say for the topics that I felt confident in, sure, I went in there and I could identify the answer. But like I said, I knew what I didn't know and I was very aware of that. So I just paid a little bit more attention, right? When I saw that oncology question come up, I'm like, all right, here we go. We need to pay a little bit more attention. Don't just breeze over it and so forth. And so that was my kind of technique to it. But there's some disease states that I do feel extremely confident in. And those questions give me points. I would hope so. Once you pass, you don't get a breakdown of the exam. So I think I did well in those sections, but I really truly don't know. But I feel good about it.
Thank you. And I didn't introduce myself. My name is Samantha, and I also go to the University of Florida. But thank you. Any other questions? We've got 3 more minutes left. So this is your time. I have a question for Libby and Josiah. When you took your exams, did you all practice spending a certain amount of time on each question? Was that something that you focused on? And what would you recommend?
good question. I think in my mind, I didn't really spend more than a minute to a minute and a half on a question. I think that was my mental clock. I would have to go back and do the breakdown, but I knew I had a mental clock and I can feel when I'm spending too much time on a question. If I didn't know it, it's time to keep rolling. Because I'm not going to waste a lot of time on something. And yo, I'm guessing regardless. And so when I started getting deeper into the exam and I started to see, oh, I only have X amount of time left, but I had X amount of questions, I'm like, yo, I need to speed up a little bit. So I just started speeding up slowly, but sure. Like I had a mental clock in my mind, if that makes sense. And that helped me like gauge timing on the exam.
Yeah, I
But Libby, you
think
can share.
yeah, something similar for me. I like whatever, however many questions is like 225 or something for the NAPLEX, and I divide it by 6 hours. I'm like, okay, I can't spend too much time on a question. Like, this is my baseline. And some questions would require you to like read a whole patient case and figure out what information you need. And so, like, those ones would take a little bit more time than others, but I just made sure I was like, okay, at 3 hours, I should be here. After an hour, I should be here. So that's what I did to make sure that I was like staying on time, but other than that, I didn't really use that too much when I was, like, actually studying.
Yeah. I feel like I always have a hot take on this because I did not focus on how long it was taking me for each question. And I just trusted that if I made it through and answered the questions correctly, even if I didn't make it to that last question, I was going to answer enough that I would still pass. Again, it was a hot take. I did not pay attention to the timing. So I always just like to hear people's opinions. So thanks for sharing.
Thanks for the question. So we are at time, but I want to thank our panelists for joining and giving us some of their time this evening. And I know that they had said they'd love to connect with you all if they're not already connected with you. So I know they're on LinkedIn because I saw their pictures from LinkedIn. But yeah. So thank you guys for joining us this evening and asking the really great questions and just engaging with us. And I hope you found this valuable. Have a good evening, y'all.